Hey everybody, this is Kevin Steinhauser at Fiveable, and today we're going to launch into our argumentation unit. We're going to spend pretty much the rest of 2018 really hitting home argumentation. So today we'll kind of look at a basic overview, and then soon we'll be getting into practical writing. What kind of evidence do I want to use on argumentation for College Board, AP Language and Composition writing? Really quickly, before we get going, I want to make sure you do want to view AP Language as a process that we just work on all year long. So I know it's very possible to get busy throughout the year and kind of let this extra stuff slide in terms of like really looking at our Fiveable resources or really just deliberately practicing throughout your class. Really, I want to challenge you all to stick with it, because more than maybe any other AP class, it really does matter what you do in November, December, January. This is not a class that you can cram for. So deliberately practicing argumentation writing and doing it the right way all year long will really come in handy on the AP test itself. We just finished talking about rhetorical analysis. So some great live session replays to go back and check out throughout the year. For rhetorical analysis, we did a deep dive in thinking like a critical thinker through someone else's text, and then how to actually translate those thoughts into writing. Well, we'll actually do something pretty similar with argumentation. In order to write and score like a college student, you have to think like a college student. So I'll do a quick overview today on how to effectively think through the argumentation prompt. That's really where we're starting today. So I'll get this PowerPoint set up. As always, please let me know if you have any questions or want any clarification as we go through this live session tonight. So I call this session, it's a trap. I get him from Admiral Akbar on Star Wars. I play in my classroom all the time that 2-second clip from Star Wars where Admiral Akbar yells, "It's a trap." That is what I want you thinking about when you're looking at argumentation essays. I'll explain what I mean by that. So every single essay, and this is our focus of the live session today, students often write pretty good essays on slightly the wrong topic. So when I say it's a trap, compose yourself when you're writing the argumentation essay and really focus on, am I writing about what I'm actually supposed to be writing about? Or am I kind of choosing an easier topic to write about? Even though you might not realize it, you have to make sure you are actually getting the nuance of the prompt. So that's our focus today, is just deconstructing prompts. That's where we're headed. Next week, we're focusing the entire live session on choosing the best evidence. So you'll hear me unpack this a lot next week. What I believe is that mostly juniors and seniors in high school take this class, although there are some sophomores as well. Every sophomore, junior, and senior has enough background information. I firmly believe that. The challenge that we'll work through next week is accessing that background information, choosing out of all the stuff that's in my head, what best applies to the topic at hand. All right, so for today, let's take a little bit of time to talk about argumentation as a whole, since we're just launching this unit together before we get into the unpacking of actual AP prompts. So remember, you are graded holistically. Every component of effective writing is considered during scoring. You heard me say this at the very beginning tonight. To score like a college student, you must write like a college student. So yeah, having great thoughts are necessary, but I have to also translate them effectively into writing. So that's how I'm writing, not only what I'm saying, but how I'm saying it, and also how I'm organizing my thoughts. So here's our expectations for argumentation. Please remember this before we go any further. There are 3 types of writing in which you'll be scored on a 1 to 9 scale for the AP Language and Composition exam. Synthesis, we're going to go over synthesis in January. Rhetorical analysis, which we just finished unpacking through a multi-week series, and argumentation, which we're going to start and go through, like I said, the next month and a half. Now, the reason in Fiveable, I am choosing to go kind of out of order, because synthesis, rhetorical analysis, and argumentation, that's the order they will appear in your packet. on test day. But I'm going in the order of difficulty based on national averages. So typically speaking, our students score the lowest on rhetorical analysis. The second lowest is argumentation, that's right in the middle. And then the highest is actually synthesis. So I decided, let's go with Fiveable, practicing the hardest one first through this platform, and then the second most difficult now, because that way, as we're moving into argumentation, I want you still going back to those rhetorical analysis replays if necessary, but at least the thoughts that we worked through together, because I want you to deliberately practice all year long. So we've deliberately practiced rhetorical analysis for a couple months now. That doesn't go away just because we're moving into argumentation. I've got to keep all the balls in the air that I'm juggling for this class. All right, so with all of that said, let's go into argumentation. So first, you must have an articulate argument. In other words, it must be extremely clear what you believe and why you believe it. Second, this is our focus next week. You must choose the best and most appropriate evidence to support your position. Third, and I bolded this intentionally, thorough explanation of how evidence supports your argument. This is where you earn your score. And in future weeks, we will really unpack what this looks like. And again, I'm an AP reader for many years, so I'll tell you what most students do who earn a 4 and what students do typically to earn a 6, 7, 8, or even 9. Fourth, we want nuanced perspective. What I mean by that, so that nuance is kind of a buzzword. Nuance just simply says, are you thinking about whatever the topic is like a college student? Or are you simply saying the first thing that comes to your mind and not really knowing your way around the topic, not really considering all sides, all points of view? So in order to offer a nuanced perspective, you must make it clear to your reader, and again, in a very tough setting because you got 40 minutes to think and write, but you must make it clear to your reader that you are thinking about the topic from multiple angles, not just the first thing that comes to mind, or not just simply what you believe. You have to show that you're considering the opposition, you're considering the counter argument, and you're addressing it head on. It doesn't have to be, and I'll get into this later in future sessions, it doesn't have to be, here's my counter argument paragraph. What it does need to be, and again, this isn't our focus tonight, but I want you to know very clearly where we're headed. It doesn't have to be a full counter argument paragraph, but what it does need to be is back and forth. Some may believe blank, but I believe blank. And that's the thoughts that I want you thinking. That's not the way I would actually express it in writing. You don't need to say I believe ever in your paper, but just as we're thinking through it. Others believe X. This is what I'm saying. All right, and then lastly, effective writing style. These are the 5 components to really shooting for those upper level scores. So I'm going to unpack each of these. I know I started doing that already, but just I wanted to give you a slide on each just to make sure if you wanted to go back and just look through this live video at your own pace, you can click to these slides. The way that I'm doing Fiveable this year, or that I'm kind of putting these things together, I want all these videos to be something you can go back to at any time, because this is a skill-based class. It's not, oh crap, I forgot how to argue. It's how exactly should I formulate my argument? What exact kind of support should I be using, etc. Whatever you want to go back and review, I want to give you that opportunity. So with that said, articulate argument. Your position is clear throughout the essay. The thesis statement of an argumentation essay is crucial. Your thesis statement clearly states your argument, not anybody else's. Make sure it's clear what you believe and what you are arguing. Likewise, each body paragraph, and I would say you should have 2 or 3 body paragraphs, very thorough, which again, I'm going to go over with you all. Each body paragraph has a clear, succinct topic sentence that clearly links back to your thesis. Again, that's a future live session. We will focus on body paragraphs. Super, super important live session. All right, and then lastly, for articulate argument, your paragraphs logically flow from one to the next. What it can't be is, all right, let me take the first 2 things that come to mind in terms of concrete evidence. I'll talk about the first thing that comes to my mind first and the second thing that comes to my mind second, because that is usually very random and they don't flow together. I'm not going to tell you there's one right way to organize, but what I will tell you is that you must have a purpose for why body paragraph 1 is first, body paragraph 2 is second, and if you have a third body paragraph, why that's your last body paragraph. You must be deliberate and purposeful in your organization. All right, when we come to appropriate evidence, again, this is our live session next week. Your evidence clearly supports your topic sentence. Your evidence is not your topic sentence. Your evidence supports whatever you're claiming in your topic sentence. Your evidence is the best support available, and there's an appropriate blend of evidence. That's our true focus next week. So for example, is it anecdotal evidence? Is it historic evidence? Is it current events, etc.? And I'll help you next week how to choose which evidence is best when I've got a plethora of evidence. With that said, I started this off today, and I'll say it again. You have enough background information. The skill here is making an argument and then choosing the absolute best evidence to support your case. And now remember, this is the most important component. Thorough explanation of your evidence and how it supports your argument. So I'm not spending multiple sentences explaining my evidence. I'm sorry, summarizing my evidence. I'm spending that time explaining how it connects to my claim. My claim is in my topic sentence and in my thesis. Now, explain in detail why the evidence supports your point. Very clearly, this is the most important part of argumentation. You can have a beautiful topic sentence with a claim. You can have a beautiful example and a couple sentence summary of concrete evidence. But if this component falls short, you will not have a qualifying score for college credit in terms of the argumentation component. So we want 5 6s and higher for argumentation. We want that for every essay, and that'll just track naturally, of course, considering your multiple choice score as well, to at least a 3. So we got to get 5 6s and higher. I will be stuck in the realm of 4 if I have the right evidence, I have clear claims, but I don't efficiently and effectively support and explain how my evidence proves my point. Your evidence is only as strong as your explanation. All right, when I say nuanced perspective, I unpacked this a little bit earlier. But again, you're basically just showing, yes, I have fully considered this topic. I'm an expert at this topic, or at least I'm portraying myself as an expert in this topic. Look at that last bullet point. Use statements such as, if not for blank, then blank. So I'm not going to give it concrete examples of what that looks like today, but that's certainly my vision for future weeks. When we get to explanation of evidence, what I just talked about, that is my opportunity to show nuance, and that I've actually thought very thoroughly through this topic. That's when we'll really focus on like the, if it wasn't for blank, blank would happen. That's the way I explain at a very college level how my evidence connects to my claims. And then effective writing style. Actually, last week as we ended rhetorical analysis, we talked a little bit about this. Now, we mainly focused on last week embedding quotes, which is a skill that's actually useful for synthesis and rhetorical analysis. We did it through the rhetorical analysis lens. Effective writing, all the other components that we talked about very briefly still apply to argumentation. English conventions, meaning grammar, spelling, capitalization, etc. Precise language and varied sentence structure. So, as you're working as a writer this entire year, any class that you're in, if you are writing on a page or typing on a computer, you can practice effective writing style. Simply put, follow the rules of English that you already know. Don't just, even if your teacher, it may be science or social studies or not English class, doesn't take off points because of grammar. You want to get in the habit of just doing it the right way every time. So focus, because you want to do well in this class, you want to become a better writer, focus on always holding to a high grammatical standard. Likewise, always focus on, no matter what the class is, when you're writing, practice writing. What is the most precise word for this situation? Notice you're never going to hear me say, what is the biggest word I know? I'm going to put it on the page. I have a pretty extensive vocabulary, but that doesn't mean I'm trying to reach for words you've never heard of when I'm writing, or my audience has never heard of when I'm writing. I'm reaching for the words that's going to best convey my point, which, again, I'm assuming my writer or my reader for College Board is an extensive writer, and reader, so they have an extensive vocabulary. So don't worry about like finding words that are going to impress them. They've probably seen every word you're throwing down. What impresses us as AP readers is using the exact word that proves your point. You get to write the argument here. That's why so many students love argumentation writing, because there are very few restraints as to what you can talk about. You have to talk about the right topic, which is our focus here today, but the support can be very wide-ranging. It's all about how you explain it. So unlike rhetorical analysis, which are pretty pigeonholed on whatever the reading is that you're analyzing, or unlike synthesis, in which a lot of your support has to come from the sources that they provide, argumentation is all what you can bring to the table. Well, when it comes to building your own argument, you want to use the most precise language possible. Your audience is a general audience, a generally educated audience. You're not writing directly to an AP reader. As we read an argumentation essay, we view that as AP readers as you as a student are writing to the world, right? You're bringing your voice, you're putting your voice out there. So it's not just to me as an AP reader or whoever your AP reader is. It's just putting your voice out there. So you're writing to a pretty broad but educated audience. You have to bring your voice to the table. And then varied sentence structure, very simply put, just as a tenet of effective writing. Now, let's talk about the rest of the time today, not falling into the trap of the prompt. I promise you, I said this very early on, this is where our focus is the rest of the live session today. Do not be like so many students every year. Every time that I teach AP Language and Composition, as a teacher, I fight this battle in the classroom because I have a lot of empathy for my students. It is much harder to sit on your side of the desk than mine, because I'm teaching and I've been through it and I have college credit and I have an English degree, right? But on your side of the table, you've only got 40 minutes to prove what you can do. In 40 minutes, it is not easy to show how good of a writer and thinker you are. So that's going to be our focus here, is thinking like a college student and then translating it into writing within the time constraints that College Board has set forth. Now, because of those time constraints, so many students want to rush into the writing. So my biggest advice before we move any further, take 5 minutes for argumentation I'm talking about. When you get to the argumentation essay, and you can read them or you can write them in any order. Most students write argumentation last simply because it's the last prompt that's given to you. But whenever you get to argumentation, take 5 minutes to read the prompt, ensure that you know what you actually have to do, what is actually being asked of you as a writer, and then brainstorm and figure out what you're going to say. But don't rush into the brainstorming until you are 100% confident. This is what the expectation for me is as a writer. This is exactly what I must be talking about. Again, so many students write strong essays on the wrong topic. I'm going to walk you through several previously released prompts, and we're going to be in about the 2006 to 2010 range, because a lot of prompts that are more recent, I'm sure you'll be practicing in class this year. So I want to talk about some that you might not get to. Every single College Board argumentation prompt, whether by design or not, has a trap that I've identified that most students, if they write slightly off topic, fall into. Now, I'm not saying most students fall into the trap, but I'm saying there are so many really strong writers who get 4s, which is like right before college level. And they're so frustrated because they know they're writing better than at the 4 level on that 1 to 9 rubric. But it's because they're not fully addressing the topic or just not addressing the right topic. So we're going to jump in with the 2005 prompt, and then we're going to work our way up sequentially through 2010. Bear with me as I read each of the prompts. Some of you may have seen these prompts before. Some of you may be seeing these for the first time. So I'm going to read the argumentation prompt, and then I'll tell you, this is what you should be writing about. This is the trap that so many people fall into. Don't fall into the trap. All right, so let's look at 2005. In the Singer Solution to World Poverty, an article that appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics, calls attention to the urgent need for food and medicine in many parts of the world. Singer argues that prosperous people should donate to overseas aid organizations, such as UNICEF or Oxfam America, all money not needed for the basic requirements of life. The formula is simple. This is a quote from Singer. Whatever money you're spending on luxuries, not necessities, should be given away. So argumentation prompts, they will always give you, at the top, like I just read, background information. And then they'll give you a smaller paragraph. This is where I really want you to hone in on what to do. So let's read the smaller paragraph. Write an essay in which you evaluate the pros and cons of Singer's argument. Use appropriate evidence as you examine each side, and indicate which position you find more persuasive. Now, I chose to start with this 2005 prompt just because I'm going in order from 2005 to 2010. But I do want to say before we go any further, by the end tonight, I will tell you this is exactly what I would expect on this year's AP exam in terms of the structure and the wording of the prompt, of the argumentation prompt. I do not believe the wording itself or even the expectation is going to be like the 2005 prompt. The prompts have become a lot more consistent in the wording, and that way it's not. And again, guys, College Board could change it up on us without announcing. They're allowed to do that. But what I've noticed is that the wording has become more and more similar in recent years. And I think the reason why College Board has done that is because they want to make sure they're evaluating what you've been practicing all year in terms of argumentation. So that the more recent prompts are going to be our sole focus going forward after tonight. But I still wanted to look at some older prompts, and I think that's valuable to look at where we've been in terms of AP language. But also, the trend that I'm pointing out tonight is every single prompt has a trap that so many students fall into. Whether I give it in my classroom, X amount of students fall into the trap, or if I've read sample essays from other students and from other schools. All right, so this prompt asks us to evaluate the pros and cons and to choose a side, essentially. Here's the trap of the prompt. Not evaluating the pros and cons, and you could also add here, not ultimately choosing a side. So maybe there's two traps here. Make sure you spend your time in that small paragraph and focus on what am I actually supposed to be writing about. So some students would just talk about the pros and the cons, or they would just criticize or support Singer's argument. But this prompt is specifically asking, look and critically think about both. All right, let's look at 2006B. So most years, especially in this range, there's two prompts that have been released. Either the regular prompts, which won't have a letter by it, or B, which is like a secondary offering. So here's the secondary offering. Get this out of the way. In many national elections, only a fraction of eligible voters actually casts ballots. For local elections, the voter turnout is often even smaller. To prevent this state of affairs, some countries, such as Australia, make voting compulsory for all adults. Remember, compulsory means mandatory. So that's our background information. Now, if this was 2018, I believe they would have given you a second smaller paragraph starting here, just to separate it, to make sure you're keying in on what the task is. But here's the task. In a well-written essay that draws upon your reading, experience, or observations for support, here it is. Take a position on the issue of compulsory voting. And to be honest, that last phrase, take a position on the issue, is actually very much aligned to what you'll probably see this year. Here's the trap of this prompt. Sorry, guys. PowerPoint froze on me. All right, here's the trap of this prompt. Discussing the importance of voting, but not tackling the issue of compulsory voting. Every time, no matter if it's my students or other students, that I see students writing on this prompt, so many students say, you should vote and this is why. But that's not what the prompt is asking. The prompt is asking, what do you think about the issue of compulsory or mandatory voting like they have in Australia? That is a key distinction. Now, I could write the best essay of my life on why you should vote, and I would get a 4 at best on this essay. I have to talk about what I'm actually being asked to talk about. Let's go to the other 2006 prompt. From talk radio shows, from popular magazines to weblogs, ordinary citizens, political figures, and entertainers express their opinions on a wide range of topics. Are these opinions worthwhile? Does the expression of such opinions foster democratic values? And then again, paragraph break, and here's the task. Write an essay in which you take a position on the value of such public statements of opinion, supporting your view with appropriate evidence. Now, before I flip the slide, I want everyone thinking actively, what do I have to write about here? And what might the trap be? Because if you can identify the trap that other people are going to fall into, you can avoid it yourself. Here's the trap that I've seen. In fact, there's 2. So first, many students writing this essay discuss whether or not these opinions are worthwhile, but they don't discuss anything about fostering democratic values. Remember, that is one of the key questions here. Does the expression of such opinions foster democratic values? And here's a second trap. Writers only discuss one of the following 3 groups of people: ordinary citizens, political figures, and entertainers. Let's go back and look at how they were used. Just read the first sentence with me again. This is the background. From talk radio to television shows, from popular magazines to weblogs, ordinary citizens, political figures, and entertainers express their opinions on a wide range of topics. So we have to be thinking about all 3 groups. Basically everyone, right? If ordinary citizens is one of our 3 categories, we're basically talking about everyone who has the platform through weblogs or higher forms of media. And by higher forms, I mean like harder to get into. So that might be the entertainers and the political figures, or writers who can get published through radio, television, or magazines. But the point is, weblogs are also there, so everyone can get their opinions out there. Anyone these days can get their opinions out there. That's what we have to be talking about. If I only talk about political figures or entertainers, I'm kind of missing the point of the prompt. All right, let's look at another one. We're going to kind of do rapid fire. Here's the prompt. Here's the trap. Here's the prompt. Here's the trap. But I want, starting at the last slide, I'm going to challenge you as we're following along to just in your mind, identify what the prompt is actually asking and identify what the trap might be. Again, what the trap is that other people might fall into. 2007B. Now, I excerpted this. This is after a quick overview of muckraking, which is we'll get into here, but it's a journalistic term. So let's go ahead and read. This is the second paragraph, which is the prompt. I still have to identify the prompt or the actual writing task within this paragraph. So let's read it. Do you agree with Mitford's view that it is an honor to be called a muckraker? Or, and then they define muckraking for you, which is really nice. Do you think that journalists who search out and expose real or apparent misconduct go too far in the pursuit of their stories? Do you think muckrakers go too far in the pursuit of their stories? You get to choose a side here. And then it says, always explain your position in a well-written essay that uses specific evidence for support. Take a second before I flip the slide. What do I actually have to do? What might the trap be? So the trap here is not writing about muckraking in journalism. I give this prompt to my students every year. I've been doing it for years. Every year, I get probably, depending on when I give it, if I give it early in the year, it's a third of the students in the class who fall into the trap. And then the numbers dwindle down by May because my students work all year on not falling into the trap. But so many students do this for this prompt in particular. They write about searching and exposing real or apparent misconduct, but they don't focus on journalism. They don't focus on journalists. They focus on just their everyday friends. Here is, maybe it's just because of our state in life as juniors and seniors, but here is the #1 piece of wrong evidence that my students use every year. It is none of your business why I broke up with my girlfriend or boyfriend. And they think that that's muckraking. That is not at all muckraking. So people who gossip, that's not what we're talking about here, right? But every year, I'd say 20 to 30% of my students want to jump into that. So the point being, and we're going to launch into this next week, don't talk about the first thing that comes to your mind. Again, take 5 minutes, make sure you're actually addressing what you should be addressing. I'm going to be honest, I've read some really strong essays about why gossip is bad, but that's not answering this prompt. All right, next, 2007. The practice of offering incentives for charitable acts is widespread, from school projects to fund drives by organizations such as public television stations, to federal income tax deductions for contributions to charities. In a well-written essay, develop a position on the ethics of offering incentives for charitable acts. Support your position with evidence from your reading, observation, and/or experience. Take a second. What do I have to write about here? If I was about to write, what do I have to do? And what is the trap that other people are going to fall into? Here's the trap. So many students do this. They discuss charitable giving, but they do not discuss the ethics of offering incentives. I'm going to say it again. They talk about the importance of giving money away, but there's no talk about ethics. You can write the best essay of your life on why you should charitably give to organizations, but if you don't mention or really nuance or really think, sorry, let me try to say it again. If you don't think thoroughly and nuanced about ethics of offering incentives, the best you can get is a 4. Let's go back to this one to make sure you're seeing why I'm saying that. Go to the second to last sentence. This is what the prompt is. The last sentence is just saying support it with evidence. That's what we're going to talk about next week. But here's the prompt. In a well-written essay, develop a position on the ethics of offering incentives for charitable acts. But so many students, under the pressure of a 40-minute timed essay, say, okay, I know charity. My parents give to charity. I'm going to talk about that. Let's talk about ethics. That's what this essay is about. 2008B. This is a pretty tough one, actually. So above what I've excerpted, College Board provided 3 short paragraphs from Daniel Boorstin. And he kind of had some tough language to navigate through, talking about dissent versus disagreement. Let's go ahead and just read the task itself. Read the following excerpt from Daniel. I'm sorry, I was looking ahead. This actually came before his statement. So let's start again. Read the following excerpt from The Decline of Radicalism by Daniel J. Boorstin and consider the implications of the distinction Boorstin makes between dissent and disagreement. Really, they're giving you a purpose for reading here. Look for the distinction between dissent and disagreement. And then here's the prompt, or here's the task. Then, using appropriate evidence, write a carefully reasoned essay in which you defend, challenge, or qualify Boorstin's distinction. Let's pause on this lingo because we haven't seen it much yet. So defend means you agree, and you fully agree. Challenge means you disagree. He's wrong, and here's why. And qualify means you're somewhere in the middle. So I want to pause on qualify. Again, at the end tonight, I'll tell you this is what I expect the language to be this year. It could say defend, challenge, and qualify. What I've noticed is we're actually in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19 this year, getting away from those like words. And it's going to say something more like take a position. But if it does say the word qualify, don't let that get in your way. The most nuanced writers often qualify because qualifying means Boorstin sometimes right, but sometimes wrong. Qualifying is great, but don't misunderstand what it is. Qualifying is not saying, yeah, he's sometimes right and sometimes wrong. No, qualifying is saying this is exactly where I agree with Forston. This is exactly where I disagree with him. So it's being very specific, but also then very nuanced, right? If you just 100% agree with something, the question is, how hard are you actually thinking about it, or are you just blindly following? And likewise, if you 100% disagree with something, if you challenge it, are you actually looking at it like, can you concede somewhere where Forston is right, or whoever's argument you're analyzing? All right, let's look at the next slide. Here's the trap of this prompt. To be honest, it's simply not understanding Forston's distinction between dissent and disagreement. So I didn't copy his words, but so many students struggle with this prompt when they write it. And the reason is because of Forston's words themselves. I do not expect this year for argumentation to be like this prompt, but I wanted to point out there are still many people here who write a pretty decent essay on the wrong topic. So, for example, Forston here argues dissent is when we just can't come to see the other side, so it leads to like resentment. Or disagreement is we will agree to disagree, but we don't hate each other afterwards. So if I don't get that nuanced distinction that he's making, I can't really write this essay, because a lot of students who don't feel comfortable with Forston's like 3 paragraphs just choose to talk about dissent and disagreement and actually talk about them as one and the same. But the whole point of his excerpt that I did not copy and paste is dissent is different than disagreement. In fact, they're polar opposites, even though, like, in terms of denotation, they're very, very similar in terms of their definition. All right, 2008. After a brief explanation of corporate sponsorship in schools. So there's several sentences above what I've excerpted here that just talk about this sponsorship in schools. Corporate sponsorship meaning businesses who sponsor schools. Let's go ahead and read the actual paragraph where the task is. Again, try to find the trap that so many people fall into. Some people argue that corporate sponsorships are a necessity for cash-strapped schools. Others argue that schools should provide an environment free from ads and corporate influence. Using appropriate evidence, write an essay in which you evaluate the pros and cons of corporate sponsorship for schools and indicate why you find one position more persuasive than the other. This one actually reminds me of the first prompt we looked at tonight. It's different than most, and I don't expect this year you to have to evaluate the pros and cons, but the point being, there's two traps again, same as the first one tonight. Not evaluating the pros and cons, maybe just focusing on one, or not clearly choosing a side. So I don't expect the pros and cons to be a part of 2019's test. However, that's not going to throw you off if they do, right? I'm taking 5 minutes and making sure I see what's being asked of me, and then I'm making a game plan. We can do this. Next prompt, 2009B. So Barbara Einreich has a statement that I did not type up here. So you read that statement, and then here's the prompt. The passage below, I guess, I'm sorry, again, I said it wrong. This is first and the statement's after. The passage below is from The Worst Years of Our Lives by Barbara Einreich. Einreich is writing about life in the 1980s. Read the passage carefully, and then write an essay in which you support, refute, or qualify Einreich's assertions about television. Support your argument with appropriate evidence. So this one's very similar to Forston a couple slides back. If you don't get what Einreich is saying, you're not going to be able to write it effectively. So really the trap here is this. It's a comprehension issue. Again, I don't expect, in more recent years we haven't seen this, so I don't expect this year for them to be assessing your ability to comprehend. In part, that's what they were assessing in 2009 if you got this prompt, or if you got Forston's prompt, 2008. Because if you can't comprehend fully the nuance of her perspective, you can't truly form like your own opinions about it. Now let's pause on the language here. Support, I don't think that they're going to use these words this year, but they very well could. So support means agree, refute means disagree, and qualify we talked about. 2009, here's the other prompt. This is a great prompt. So here's a quote, and then we unpack it. Let's read the quote from Horace. Adversity has the effect of eliciting talents which in prosperous circumstances would have lain dormant. Now it says, consider this quotation about adversity from the Roman poet Horace. Then write an essay that defends, challenges, or qualifies Horace's assertion about the role that adversity, financial or political hardship, danger, misfortune, etc., plays in developing a person's character. Support your argument with appropriate evidence from your reading, observation, or experience. Now, College Board was nice here. If you do not know what adversity is, they basically defined it or gave examples of it. But a lot of people who write this prompt, again, in a 40-minute constrained setting, which you can't ask a teacher a quick clarifying question, struggle with the language here. It's a one-sentence quote, but it's packed with some tough language. Lain dormant, a lot of the context clue there is actually a volcano, right? Like that's when we see dormant used the most in our society today, as a dormant volcano. Talents were good. We were probably good with prosperous circumstances. Eliciting, we just have to use context clues. So adversity has the effect, and adversity is defined for us, of bringing out talents. So this is the opposite of dormant. This is our context clue. Of bringing out talents which in more prosperous circumstances would have never been used, lain dormant. So the trap here is, simply put, not understanding his quote. Now I have good news. I do not believe, like I just said, that this year you will be assessed through argumentation on your reading abilities, because really the first step to write an argumentation essay here is reading Horace's quote at a high level. But it's still a trap. So many students rush in and don't take time to make sure they understand Horace's quote. They read it once, and then they simply talk about adversity. But you have to talk about adversity in the context of this quote, eliciting talents which in prosperous circumstances would have lain dormant. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe even if I understand this quote, I might rush into and still talk about the wrong part of adversity. I have to talk about it as Horace uses it in this quote. All right, here's a 2010 prompt. There's a pretty brief description of Buy Nothing Day provided, and then here are these three sentences. Consider the implications of a day on which no goods are purchased. Then write an essay in which you develop a position on the establishment of an annual Buy Nothing Day. Pretty lame sentence here. Support your argument with appropriate evidence. That is a pretty much non-negotiable, right? We're going to do that if they tell us to or not. So College Board generally has a sentence that says, support your argument with appropriate evidence, just to make sure, hey, don't forget, that's the point here. But my point today is make sure you're using the right, or you're writing about the right argument. So what's the trap here? I believe the trap, based on what I've seen with student writers, is discussing consumerism, but not specifically considering the implications of establishing an annual Buy Nothing Day. You can write the best essay of your life on why consumerism is good or bad, but if you don't talk about the idea of a Buy Nothing Day, I bet you can get the 4. Here it is right here, the second sentence. Write an essay in which you develop a position on the establishment of an annual Buy Nothing Day. So you need to make sure, like, let's not rush. There's been a lot of stuff that we read with that brief description, but what do I actually have to do? Sometimes the description or the context that they provide is directly related to what they ask you, and sometimes it's just to get you ideas and get you thinking. What I make my students do is underline the sentence that provides the explicit task. So I would have my students underline, write an essay in which you develop a position on the establishment of an annual Buy Nothing Day. That way my students know, they're just making sure they're pausing. They're all capable of doing this, and so are you, right? But in a 40-minute constrained setting, it's very tempting to want to go in and rush. Underline it, reread it, Make sure everything that you brainstorm and then write about is about what you underline. Here's the other one from 2010. In his 2004 book, Status Anxiety, Alain de Botton argues that the chief aim of humorists is not merely to entertain, but to convey with impunity messages that may be dangerous or impossible to state directly. Because society allows humorists to say things that other people cannot or will not say, de Botton sees humorists as serving a vital function in society. That was background information. Now here's the task. I would have my students underline the sentence that actually provides the explicit task. This is a think about statement, so we're not here yet. Think about the implications of de Botton's view of the role of humorists. They give examples of humorists: cartoonists, stand-up comics, satirical writers, hosts of television programs, etc. Then write, so I'm underlining this sentence, an essay that defends, challenges, or qualifies de Botton's claim about the vital role of humorists. Use specific appropriate evidence to support your claim, as always. Now, if I underlined this sentence, I have to talk about de Botton's claim. So I have to comprehend here. Now, this is not a super hard thing to comprehend, so I don't really believe much of this is assessing your ability to read at a high level. It's really, can you think at a high level? But are you thinking about the right topic? Do you agree, disagree, or do you somewhat qualify his claim about the vital role of humorists? Here's the trap that most students fall into if they fall into a trap. Discussing humorists, but not considering their vital role in society. So I might talk about humorists and say, this is my favorite comedian and this is what he does, and I've seen so many people do this. They write a pretty good essay on what humorists are and what they do. But if you don't talk about what de Botton talks about, you're missing the point of the prompt. All right, let's just take the last few minutes here to kind of wrap up and look to the future. So here's what I believe the language will be like of recent prompts. Develop a position on blank, as opposed to defend, challenge, or qualify, or refute, or whatever the argumentation lingo is. The reason for this shift, and this is me kind of getting into the College Board's head here, I believe that developing or taking a position, because it might say take a position, it might say develop a position. It's College Board's way of letting the language of argumentation get out of your way so you can effectively argue. It's College Board's way of pushing us as writers into a more nuanced perspective. When I have to develop a position, I'm not fully challenging, I'm not fully defending. Oftentimes I'm qualifying. Now, you're allowed to fully challenge and fully defend, but they're getting that lingo away, so I'm just thinking as a writer, what do I believe? Because that's what this is all about. They want us to be arguing in a nuanced, complex way, and they want us to be considering all sides of the argument. So in future weeks, not next week, but weeks after, that's our priority through the month of December. Next week, let's see, next week we're actually off for Thanksgiving. So we'll be back on the 27th. On the 27th, we will be focusing on a concrete blend of evidence. So I'll go back to that slide, but I want to make sure there are weekly live streams focusing on argumentation through the year. Next week, we're focusing on choosing the best evidence and the best blend of evidence. Our final thought tonight, if you don't hear anything from me, if you don't remember anything about tonight, remember this. When you get to argumentation, breathe, take 5 minutes, read the prompt slowly, underline the sentence that gives you the explicit writing task, read it 2 or 3 times, and then brainstorm. But don't start brainstorming, which we're going to do next week, until you actually know what the topic is of the prompt. What are you actually being asked to do? All right, so that is it for tonight. Next week, again, we are in concrete evidence mode. Now, concrete evidence is not the most important piece. What's the most important piece is your argument and how you use your evidence to support your argument. But we can't go anywhere because I don't want to spend time talking about concrete evidence and talking about how I can articulate it if I'm not talking about the right topic. So tonight, even though it's kind of a duh kind of night, like of course I have to write about the prompt, it's probably the most important session because I promise you so many students, session in terms of argumentation, because I promise you so many students write really good essays that maybe deserve 6s, 7s, and highers, but get 4s because they don't take the time up front to make sure they're talking about the right topic. So that is what I really want you focusing on. Every single argumentation topic, breathe, and make sure you're talking about the right thing. Only then can we worry about what to do. All right, everybody, that is it for tonight. Have a good rest of the evening. Have a good Thanksgiving, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about concrete evidence.